Are you curious about the transformative potential of herbal medicine? Join me, Nichole Dandrea-Russert, in this month's Action Hour with internationally renowned herbalist and ethnobotanist David Winston. With decades of experience in Chinese, Western, and Southeastern American herbal traditions, David will share how herbs can support vibrant health, complement modern medicine, and empower you to take charge of your wellness journey. In our conversation, we will uncover the truth behind common misconceptions about herbal medicine, share practical tips for incorporating herbs into your daily routine, and explore how to harness their healing power to support vibrant health. Whether you're new to herbal remedies or looking to deepen your understanding of these time honored traditions, this interview offers valuable insights and actionable advice. Don't miss this opportunity to learn from one of the most respected voices in herbal medicine and discover how nature can help you thrive. To give you a little context, this is a project of Whole Life Club, which is Food Revolution Network's ongoing membership community. Some of the questions that I will be bringing to this interview come from our Whole Life Club members. Nothing you hear today is medical advice. We are offering coaching and our own best insights. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional regarding your specific healthcare realities and needs. Now, on to our wonderful expert, David Winston. David Winston is an internationally renowned herbalist, ethnobotanist, author, and founder of Herbalist and Alchemist. With 55 years of experience, he's a leading educator in Chinese, Western, eclectic, and Southeastern American herbal traditions. His 2-year program at the David Winston Center for Herbal Studies has trained healthcare professionals in clinical herbal medicine since 1980. David's Herbal Therapeutics Research Library houses over 8,000 volumes and 15,000 articles supporting his research, writing, and industry contributions. A founding member of the American Herbalist Guild, he has played a pivotal role in professionalizing clinical herbalism. He's the best-selling author of Adaptogens, Herbs for Strength, Stamina, and Stress Relief. He also serves on the review committee for the influential Botanical Safety Handbook. As a clinical herbal consultant, David advises hundreds of physicians across North America and Europe. He's a prolific author, contributing extensively to the understanding and advancement of herbal medicine. David, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you, Nichole. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and to speak with you.
Yeah, I'm really excited about today's conversation. We are going to learn so much from you. I know it. I'd love to start with your own personal journey. If you can just explain what inspired your journey into herbalism and how have your studies of different traditions shaped your approach to clinical practice?
Well, I feel truly blessed because as a very young age, I fell in love with plants. I fell in love with the idea that I could walk outside my door and I could walk in the woods or in the fields and find plants that were either medicinal or edible or both. And to me, this was just the most amazing thing. And it was surprising to me that no one else seemed to be interested. One of my first herb books, well, actually, in this case, edible plant books, was Yule Gibbons' Stalking the Wild Asparagus, quickly followed by his book, Stalking the Healthful Herbs. And again, it just sparked this fascination within me. And it has been the great love affair of my life. At my age, when I was a kid, they didn't have all these diagnoses that they have today. But I would have been diagnosed as having ADHD, and I'm also dyslexic. And having ADHD has its challenges for sure. It also sometimes has its benefits. And for me, if I'm interested in something, I can focus in on it like a laser beam. On the other hand, if I'm not very interested, it is like so hard to focus in on anything. But herbal medicine has fascinated me. Again, I've been studying herbs now for 55 years. I've been in clinical practice for 48, and I'm just as much in love with herbal medicine now as I was when I first. So when I first had that first, falling in love crush, I'm still as excited and passionate about it today as I was then. And you asked about, my studies, because I've studied different traditions of herbal medicine. And, each tradition is sort of like a lens, lenses where it has their own view on it. So traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, has one way of looking at the human body, health, disease, imbalance, wellness. Western medicine has its view. Southeastern herbal traditions have their view. And so the idea is to sort of only have one understanding, to me always seemed incomplete because no one has all the answers. My uncle, who was one of my teachers, he used to say that every tradition has this much truth. And the problem is when you start looking at it like this and think you've got all the truth. And none of us has all the truth. No tradition has all the truth. And so for me, it was always part of my desire to truly understand this from a really deep level, was to say, all right, this is how Western medicine sees this. How does Chinese medicine look at it? How does Ayurvedic medicine look at it? And looking at both the similarities and the incredible differences. And that really, for me, I think has helped me not only to broaden my understanding of what wellness truly is and what dis-ease truly is, but it helps you to have a better perspective in how to actually work with somebody, to help somebody. So for instance, if somebody comes in and, they've got they live, let's say in the, Eastern US especially, although Lyme disease is not just in the Eastern US, but it's certainly the highest levels. And they tell me they've been out in the woods a lot and they had a tick bite, and they're telling me it was a little tiny tick. It was a deer tick. And then they get a bullseye rash. I'm not going to say, here, take some herbs. I'm going to say, all right, I believe you have Lyme disease. You need to go see your doctor and get a prescription for doxycycline, preferably at least 3 to 4 weeks rather than the 2 weeks they often give, because 3 to 4 weeks is more effective. And the chances are about 95% if they do that, and they do it within a framework of 6 to 10 weeks of getting a tick bite, they're cured. That's it. They're done. I'm not 100%. Nothing's 100%. But for the most part, it's going to take care of that condition. On the other hand, from a Western perspective, if somebody says to me, I've got this problem and I have like low back pain and I'm constantly twisting my knees and my ankles. I have a feeling of sort of maybe discomfort when urinating. It's not acutely painful. It's just a sort of an achy feeling, sort of like in the low back region. And maybe if it's a man, he might say, I'm having some erectile dysfunction or lack of libido. From a Western perspective, these are all different issues. From a TCM perspective, that describes a pattern known as deficient kidney yang. And so I can look at that and go, oh, all right, you have deficient kidney yang, and I know exactly what herbs are appropriate for that person with that pattern. And so having multiple sets of glasses, so to speak, and multiple sets of tools to work with. So I'm not just focused in on Western herbs. I also use Chinese herbs and Ayurvedic herbs. And I use herbs from all over the world, as long as I understand number one, their uses, but I understand their energetics, meaning how they affect the body. I can mix and match them to fit the specific person rather than be stuck with the sort of Western model of, oh, you have a headache, you have a migraine, take feverfew. The problem with that approach is, first off, as from an herbal perspective, that's just bad herbal medicine. Because on the most simplistic level, and it gets more complicated than this, but on the most simplistic level, if you have a migraine, you can divide migraines into two basic patterns. You have excess heat migraines and deficiency cold migraines. And the herbs we use to treat one are entirely different than the herbs we use to treat the other. And in fact, if you use feverfew, which is used for excess heat migraines, for somebody with a deficiency cold migraine, it'll make it worse. So the idea is, with herbal medicine, having different traditions gives you different ways of understanding what is happening. And it also introduces you to different ideas that are outside the realm of Western medicine. Now, This isn't one of those times where people are saying, oh, Orthodox medicine is this and it's that. I work with physicians, a lot of physicians. I love working with physicians. Why? Because what they do and I do, while they overlap, they're not the same thing. Their training is not the same as mine. My training is not the same as theirs. And, if we're talking about the benefit of the patient in many scenarios, the true win-win is you have a good herbalist and a great herbalist and a great physician working together because they complement one another.
Mhm.
And so when we look at herbal medicine, it in sense is a different paradigm. Our focus is not disease. Our focus is the person. Hippocrates is supposed to have said more than 2,000 years ago, it's more important to know the person that has the disease than the disease a person has. And
Mm.
that is sort of the underlying sort of way of thinking of really good herbal medicine. We treat people, not diseases. So we could have 5 people all diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. They're not 5 rheumatoid arthritises, they're 5 unique people. And while
Mm.
aspects of their protocol for those people may overlap, they'll be unique and different because the people are unique and different. And that to me is what constitutes great herbal medicine.
Oh my gosh, so much there. Thank you for explaining. I think just kind of looking at this on so many levels. First, I think a lot of as consumers that are experiencing symptoms, we want to go online and find something. Your migraine was a great example, and we see an herb that helps with migraines, and we think that we can apply that to us. But I think that your um, explanation is something that we often say, but you explained it so perfectly. Everyone's so individualized. So a lot of times we deal a lot with food. A lot of folks want a menu. Give me a plant-based menu and I'll follow it tomorrow. But we can't do that. Everyone's so different. The way you react to food's different. What you like is different. Everybody's so individualized. I think this just explains it on just a in a higher level at looking at it from a medical approach. And I love that you have this foundation, a holistic view of all of these different traditions that you can bring together. And then you look at this holistic person or this person from a holistic view and, and, and treat them individually or as individuals and what they're experiencing. It also leads into my next question, which you pretty much answered in that, but if you'd like to share anything more, I was curious just about any insights on how herbs can support and complement modern medicine. And I think you gave a great example, but did you want to expand a little bit more on
I think I could expand a little bit more on that.
that?
So here's the thing. There are times when Orthodox medicine or Western medicine, whichever one, the only problem I have sometimes people call it traditional medicine. No, what I do is traditional medicine. So whether Orthodox or Western medicine, they do some things incredibly well. So, again, going back to the Lyme disease example, if somebody has Lyme disease, don't call the herbalist, don't call the chiropractor, don't call the Reiki healer, go see your doctor and get antibiotics. Again, usually doxycycline. But so that is a scenario where your primary modality is going to be Orthodox medicine. There are some things herbally you can do to support that. All right. Among other things, just on a simplistic level, which a lot of Orthodox physicians are starting to do now, is maybe they tell you to get a probiotic yeast called Saccharomyces boulardii to take when you're taking the antibiotics so you don't develop C. diff, which is Clostridium difficile, which is a really problematic and serious bacterial overgrowth infection in the GI tract. So that's one scenario. But then there are other scenarios where herbal medicine can be really useful as an adjunctive therapy, supporting orthodox therapy. But there are other scenarios where orthodox medicine has little or nothing to offer, and all they have is palliative care. And the irony is that where orthodox medicine is strong tends to be where herbal medicine is weak, And the obverse is true, is where herbal medicine is strong, especially dealing with chronic degenerative disease, is where orthodox medicine tends to be at its weakest. And so,
Mm.
again, the two together, knowing which one is most appropriate in a given situation, is truly going to be more effective. Now, you also have to look at the person. So, for instance, if you have a child diagnosed, as I said, I would have been diagnosed with ADHD, except there was no such thing as ADHD when I was a kid. That's what happens when you're old.
Uh,
So there was no ADHD when I was a child. That first definition, I think, didn't occur until the 1980s, and so that was like 30 years late. 30 years later. Um, there is a entirely effective approach to dealing with ADHD, both for children and adults, without using pharmaceutical medications at all. But it's complicated, meaning you have to look at diet, you have to look at lifestyle, we use herbs, there are supplements, there's just it's this whole big picture, and in order for it to work, you can't just change one child's diet in the house, because if you have several children in the house and they're all eating stuff that the other child can't eat, there's no way that child's not going to eat that stuff. And, if you're living in a household where maybe the parents are divorced, so you now have two households, everybody's got to be on board. And if they're going to grandma and grandpa's, they've got to be on board. And the school's got to be on board. Good luck on that one. And so it's complicated and takes a lot of work and effort. Now, the side benefit of it is not only does it help with the ADHD behaviors, but it improves overall health dramatically. Anytime you change diet for the better, it's going to improve overall health dramatically. You are well aware of that. But there are times where a lot of Western consumers want a pill. And there is no herb pill that you can take that is going to be as effective as Ritalin or Adderall. And so if that's all you're willing to do, then in that scenario, assuming that the Adderall or the Ritalin doesn't cause, significant adverse effects, which mostly it does not, that's probably the better way to go. Simply because, not just because of individual choice, but in this case, family choice. What will work within the context of that family? There are also, in many cases, we're not talking about ADHD now, but in many diseases, there are social determinants of health that have an impact, because from a truly what people call holistic perspective, it's not just the individual body, mind, and spirit that is the holistic model, but in a more sort of indigenous way of looking at things, there's the whole model of that body, mind, and spirit of the individual. That individual is not separate. They are surrounded by a group of people known as family. And they are surrounded by a bigger group of people known as community. And that is surrounded by, depending on your belief system, whether you want to call it God, creator, spirit, whatever. And we are part of something bigger than ourselves. And so therefore, to think about disease as a purely individual phenomenon that is not affected. So in Chinese medicine, there are what are called external pernicious influences or external evil: wind, heat, cold, dryness, dampness. And we are affected by those things. And so if you are a person with seasonal affective disorder and you live in a place that is really cloudy a lot of the year, seasonal affective disorder doesn't just happen in the winter. It's more likely to happen in the winter. There's also a summer seasonal affective disorder. So again, we are affected by the outside. If you have somebody who lives, let's say the typical sort of Scottish environment, or Pacific Northwest, where it's often cold and damp, and you'll see a lot more people with sort of cold, damp coughs, where lots of congestion, and so we are affected by our environment. You told me that you're out in California. Anybody think that breathing in the air with all these fires happening, and not just the particulates and the smoke, but of course all the toxic compounds that are in from burning houses and cars and all these things, we are affected. We are not isolated from our environment. So anytime we can look at a way of trying to include not only the totality of who that person is, but the things that are they affect them, the more effective we're going to be as clinicians.
You mentioned I'm in California right now, and it was snowy and rainy and pretty. I don't want to say miserable because I do like the snow, but like the sun wasn't shining for a while in Atlanta, let's say, and coming here and sadly, yeah, the fires have happened. The skies are clear though right now, and where I am, there's a lot of lavender around. I'm feeling very fortunate around, and just that aspect, walking out into nature and smelling the lavender and the sunshine, like it, I feel a big difference from where my state just a week ago,
Yes.
So it really, so many variables that can affect our health. So thank you for explaining that so clearly. I'd love to know what misconceptions there are in herbalism or maybe specific herbs, and how we can dispel any misconceptions.
There are so many, it's almost hard to know where to start. For probably since the 1930s, um, the United States, and for the most part, Canada as well, has been in what I'll call was in what I call the herbal dark ages. Herbal medicine, there used to be medical doctors, the eclectics, the physiomedicalists who practiced from the 1830s up until the 1930s or so, who were basically medical doctors who used almost entirely herbs. And as herbal medicine faded away, with the exception of a small number of ethnic and rural communities, herbal medicine was virtually extinct in the United States. And it's not until the late 1960s, mostly out of two places, the Mormon community, who basically never actually quite stopped using herbs, and created a lot of the larger herb companies like Nature's Way and Nature's Sunshine and Solar Ray. They're all Mormon-based companies, or were initially. I don't know if they still are all. Um, Out of that, and a proponent of herbal medicine named Dr. Christopher, who in the late 60s and early 70s was like just about the only herbalist that anybody had ever heard of. And he would travel around the country doing lectures and teaching and getting arrested because he would practice medicine without a license. And so he was out there. I mean, I took classes from him in the early 70s. And then the hippie movement and the whole back to the land movement, and everybody was getting back into growing things and organic gardening and organic farming and learning about the plants and edible plants. And sort of Hugh Gibbons wasn't a hippie; he was a Quaker from Pennsylvania, but his work was certainly adopted at that time. And out of those two things, we have what I will call the American herbal renaissance starts. At the time, there were no herb schools. And there weren't a lot of books on herbal medicine. There was no internet. There was no YouTube. There was no Google. So you had to go to the library, and usually they had a section of books on herbs that was 3 books, like a book or 2 on edible plants, and maybe something else. There was very limited information, and so finding information was incredibly difficult. That's not the case anymore. Now we are overwhelmed with information. You can, I love, I don't mean to mock anyone, but I love these people who tell me sometimes that they've gone online and they've done their research about whatever the topic might be. First off, so much of the information online is bad, wrong, half right, ridiculous, and then there's incredible information, but the average person has no way to differentiate one from the other. All right. When I first started learning about herbs, I would buy every book I could find and read it cover to cover. I remember books written in the late 60s, early 70s by a guy named Richard Lucas. And his books were so flawed and so full of misinformation. But at the time, I believed it because I had no way of knowing that, there was no herb called Fo Ti Tieng, and it did not contain the mysterious vitamin X.
Oh,
I mean,
gee.
oh yeah, it was
Oh my
ridiculous.
gosh.
But again, if you're starting from zero, okay, this guy seems to know
Yeah.
more than I know. So, all right. So the problem is Americans have, and so this herbal renaissance starts in the late 60s and continues through the 70s. And then in the 1980s, it really starts to happen with, that's when we founded the American Herbalist Guild was in 1989. And herb conferences start in the 80s. The first one is in Brighton Bush Hot Springs in Oregon in 1981 that Rosemary Gladstar and the California School of Herbal Studies put on. And then, of course, it continues. And then by the 1990s, all of a sudden, certain herbs are becoming popular. I used to get these phone calls. What's this herb, Echinacea? I don't get those phone calls anymore. Everybody's heard of echinacea. Everybody's heard of turmeric. Everybody's probably heard of saw palmetto and milk thistle and St. John's wort. The problem is the way these herbs are promoted is from a very allopathic Western model. So St. John's wort is the depression herb, and salt palmetto is the prostate herb, and black cohosh is the menopause herb. There's only one problem with all those things I just said. They are wrong, wrong. Oh, yeah, and the other one's wrong. All three of those are untrue. So I'm not saying that black cohosh has no benefit for menopausal symptoms, but the average woman taking black cohosh for menopausal hot flashes or night sweats or formication, skin crawling, they're going to be so disappointed. And I've talked to so many women. Oh yeah, I tried black cohosh for night sweats or whatever. It didn't really help, and so their conclusion is, oh, herbs don't work.
Mm.
Well, that's not how herbs are used. And so again, is St. John's wort work for depression? Yeah, it's about as effective as SSRIs and SNRIs, except that they're only 40% effective. And
Mm.
placebo's 33% effective. So they're slightly better than placebo. And saw palmetto, if you have a man with benign prostatic hyperplasia and he takes saw palmetto, yeah, sometimes it helps a bit. But is it like game changing? It's like all of a sudden you don't have BPH anymore? No. And so the way herbs are generally used in clinical practice is, first of all, we never use single herbs. We never give somebody a herb like you're giving somebody a pharmaceutical. You give people complex formulas that are designed to match them and their specific symptom picture and their specific energetics, whether they're hot or cold or damp or dry or whatever. And when you do that, so when you take somebody who is depressed, and let's give you an example. As an herbalist, I recognize more than 14 types of depression, and
Mm.
they're all treated differently. So
Mm.
depression is not a single entity, nor is depression for the most part caused by too much, too little serotonin or not enough dopamine. That theory was disproven a long time ago. So if you have had a cardiac event, if you've had a myocardial infarction, a heart attack, or you've had a stroke or congestive heart failure, one of the things that's more than likely going to happen after that you've gotten out of the hospital is you're going to get depressed. That's cardiac induced depression. It turns out also that the heart has endocrine function, and whether you're depressed because you almost died or whether you're depressed because of endocrine disruption or cardiac damage, it's a common phenomenon. And so cardiac depression is not treated like other types of depression, nor is thyroid induced depression, which is associated with things like hypothyroid disease, mostly Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune disease. There is GI based depression, and we now know so much more. You were talking before we started today about the gut and the gut microbiome. And we know so much more about the gut brain axis, and what's happening in the gut is affecting our entire body, including our psychological and emotional functioning. And so, for instance, if you have gut dysbiosis or you have a loss of intestinal epithelial barrier function, which is people call leaky gut syndrome, if you have IBS or IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, these can affect your emotional state, creating depression, anxiety, or both. And to just treat those conditions as depression you're probably not going to succeed. There are whole sets of herbs that are just used for GI based depression.
Mm.
Old age induced depression, blood sugar dysregulation induced depression. And so the more we can understand the underlying pathophysiology, the underlying reason why somebody's experiencing somebody, and deal with that as well as dealing with the symptoms they are experiencing, our results are going to be so much better. So, as I said, I've been in clinical practice for 48 years. And, there are people who come in who are depressed. Um, and if somebody's very seriously depressed and is having suicidal ideations, you need to send them to a physician. You need to send them to somebody who can deal with that on that level. But for the average person who has mild to moderate depression, and maybe they've tried Zoloft and or tried Prozac or Wellbutrin, and it has not helped. All right, you use an effective herbal formula based on the specifics of that person and their type of depression, you're not getting 40% efficacy. You're getting at least 70% efficacy. Now, is it 100%? Nothing's 100%. But you can use herbs to match the specific person. And again, herbs plural, not a herb, but multiple herbs, again, to match that. And so getting back to like black cohosh for menopausal symptoms. Black cohosh, by the way, by itself is underwhelming for menopausal symptomology. But if you combine, and this is a general formula, I actually don't usually use general formulas, but just as an example, you take black cohosh and you combine it with a second herb called chase tree, Vitex agnus castus, and you add in a little bit of licorice as long as they have normal blood pressure, and a little bit of motherwort, which is a anxiolytic, and maybe a little bit of sage from your spice cabinet. And now you've got something. Now
Mm.
you've got something where you're going to see significant changes. The foundations of health, number one, are diet. They say with computers, garbage in, garbage out. Well, the same thing's true with food. So number one, diet is foundational. Herbs aren't going to make up for the fact that you're eating, high calorie, low nutrient, hardly, foods that have no nutrients. It's just not going to make up for that. Number two, sleep. And it's not just how much sleep, but the quality of sleep. Number three, exercise. Number four, healthy lifestyle choices. Number five, stress reduction techniques. Number six, healthy relationships. All of these things impact health, and those are foundational. And so, as an herbalist, if I ignore all that, I'm kind of missing the boat. You can't expect herbs are going to make up for the fact that you're only getting 5 hours sleep a night. Or, temporarily maybe, because of an emergency, but long term, herbs are my favorite therapeutic tool. And they are incredibly useful because they can be used both to help prevent disease as well as treat disease, because herbs aren't just medicinal. They are also, some of them are food herbs, which means they help strengthen and nourish the body. But if we are going to be, again, if we're going to be effective, we have to actually focus in on treating that whole person and making sure that we are looking at all of the factors that are contributing to their stress. And as an herbalist, I'm not a career coach, but if somebody is working at a job that's killing them, I certainly should say something about it. Now, the person may have no choice to do anything about it. If you live in an area where the only jobs are coal mining, and your father was a coal miner and your grandfather was a coal miner, and you have no other options, it's easy to say a choice if you have one. So not everybody has a choice, but it's certainly within our purview to talk to people about things that are impacting them on an unhealthy level. And if it goes beyond our level of expertise, to refer them to somebody else who can help them in that situation.
Mhm. Yeah. So again, gosh, you explained it so well. It's what I definitely heard is that it's more complicated than just much more complicated than just getting the herb on the shelf. And we're finding that it's gosh, coaches are so needed, along with physicians, along with herbalists, along with dietitians, like the whole team approach, because there's so many aspects. There's the stress, diet, herbs. There's just so much. And there's a place for medicine, Western medicine. So,
Mhm.
all of it is just so important. So I think that it's really helping to put things in perspective. So thank you. I'd love to talk about your herbal therapeutics research library, which is renowned. How has access to your vast collection of knowledge and this research influenced your work and the entire herbal industry?
Well, I grew up in a household where books were special. And, we used to go to the library every week. Um, as somebody who is dyslexic, I didn't learn to read till I was in third grade. But I was really good at memorizing entire books. So if somebody read it to me once, I could read it back to them, except I wasn't actually reading. I just had memorized the book. And once they actually realized that I actually couldn't read, I was in third grade, and my mother realized I actually couldn't read. She found someone, because there was no such thing as dyslexia when I was a kid either. She found a woman who specialized in helping children to learn to read who had trouble learning to read. And I spent an hour with her after school every day for a year. And once I actually learned to read books, I became a voracious reader.
Mm.
And when I fell in love with herbs. Well, it's nothing better to read about than what you're in love with. And so I started reading everything I could get my hands on and started creating a little library for myself. Well, that library over 55 years grew until a year and a half ago. Let's see, I had over 9,000 volumes from 1560 or 70 to current. It's one of the largest private herbal research libraries in North America. We're talking about over 9,000 books on herbal medicine, ethnobotany, phytochemistry, medicine, the eclectic medicine, physiomedicalism, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, etc. Now, one of the things, though, that I started to think about is what to do with the library, because as one gets older, you start thinking about, I've spent over 50 years accumulating this. Now, what am I going to do with it? Because I know that none of the kids are interested in it or anything else. So, what do I do with it? I finally found someone who was interested in the library, and United Plant Savers, which is an organization dedicated to basically preserving plants, not just because of they're used to us, just because they are essential within the environment. And as an herbalist, of course, they are not only our materials of medicine, i.e., in materia medica, but they are also our allies. They are our friends, let's put it that way. And so I made the first donation, part of my library, to United Plant Savers last year, about 1,700 volumes. And so, you asked how it influenced me. Well, as I said earlier, I've trained in multiple traditions of herbal medicine, but herbal medicine is so vast. If I wanted to spend my entire life studying dandelion, I probably still, after 50 years, wouldn't know all there is to know about that one plant, let alone all the other plants that are out there. We're funny as people. We tend to think, oh, that's dandelion. The Latin name is Taraxacum officinale. It's the root's bitter and cholagogue and choleretic, and the leaf's aquaretic and non-irritating diuretic. I know it. That's nothing. That's like, a fraction of what there is to know about that plant. And so the beauty of having this resource here is, number one, of course, on a personal level, it has helped me to write my books, my articles, or there's the time I'm on an herb walk and I look up and I see a plant that I've seen pictures of, but I've actually never seen in person. And it's like
Mm.
meeting a new friend. It's like, oh, it's so joyous. Here's this plant. I know what it is because I've seen it, but I've actually never been with it. And it just opens up so many avenues of exploration, of knowledge, of ideas. And so it's been an incredible resource. And for me, the beauty of it is that the library is going to go to United Plant Savers in Ohio. And the library will then be open for anybody to access, anybody who wants to go visit, and maybe eventually they'll put a lot of it online as well. But it'll be a resource for anybody, whether they're an herbalist, a physician, a researcher, just an interested, herb enthusiast. Will be able to go and actually sit with the books that have given me so much joy and pleasure, and hopefully in perpetuity.
Well, thank you for sharing with us. And now we have to visit and go to the research library and sit, carve out a day,
Hmm.
which will give us just a very tiny, based on what you said, it sounds like we need multiple lifetimes. And I feel like this is a lesson in life because as a person who likes to grab onto one thing, like give me the answer, you want to know all the things. And we experience this. I know a lot of our whole life club members will relate, because especially anyone coming into new and you're enthusiastic about plants and you want to eat more plants, you want to know all the things overnight, and just it's magic and you have it all figured out the next day and you're just moving smoothly. It just doesn't happen. And I would love to know that too. As like a plant-based dietitian, I want to know all the things, but things are always evolving and changing. I think your explanation of your library and how dandelion root, like you could study it for a lifetime and still not know all the things if you're just focused on that. I think it's helpful to know this and to really understand this is kind of like a lesson in life where you just got to sit back like a sponge and enjoy the process and the journey and learning a little bit, and knowing that learning a little bit will and implementing some of the things that you learn along the way are making a big difference. And just it's really a journey and a process. It's not about getting to that end result and knowing all the things, because I think that could be a barrier for some, including myself. Like why do it? Like that's not. It's you feel like if you're not going to know it, or if you can't accomplish it overnight, it can almost be like a barrier. Like why even start? But approaching things as a process and a journey, and just really your passion for it all is so infectious. Just taking it all in like you do, and feeling that love and engagement with the plant and the herb and learning it along the way is just going to enrich your life every single day.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, thanks for sharing that. Now, as a founding member of the American Herbalist Guild, how do you see professional herbalists evolving in modern healthcare?
Having been a part of this American herbal renaissance, my dream is that I still hope that within my lifetime, I would like to see that almost every mom and dad, grandmother and grandfather knows some basic kitchen herbal medicine for their family. I would like to see where there are community herbalists in every community, and even more, clinical herbalists available in any clinical setting. As we discussed before, there are situations where herbalists may not have much to offer. There are situations where herbalists at best may have some adjunctive things where, for instance, we know there's lots of data showing that certain herbs can prevent, they actually enhance, for instance, there are herbs that enhance the efficacy of chemotherapy and help prevent adverse effects.
Mm.
Who wouldn't want to do that? There's a whole practice of Chinese medicine called Fu Zheng Pai Bun to restore the normal that was developed to be used with chemotherapy. And and there's studies showing greater tumor regression, greater quality of life, greater life expectancy, and way less adverse effects. And it doesn't damage the effects of the chemotherapy. It just prevents them from damaging the body. There's all sorts of things we can do sometimes to mediate some of the negative effects of orthodox therapy. Then again, there are times where herbal medicine may have a whole lot more to offer and may actually be the primary therapy. And so having someone who a physician can talk to, who understands the strengths and limitations of herbs, who understands potentials for herb drug interactions, which, by the way, I would point out, everybody's really paranoid about this. Clinically relevant herb drug interactions are very real and very rare. And the reality is my aunt Edna used to say herbs fall into one of three categories as how they affect people: food, medicine, poison.
Mm.
And so food herbs are not just things like blueberries and cinnamon and garlic and that you think of as food, but food herbs also includes things like lemon balm and chamomile and hawthorn berry, which are gentle food-like herbs. Now, anything can be overdone. People, there's two little things I'll tell people about herbal medicine. These are beginner lessons that everybody should know. Some people say, well, herbs are natural, so therefore they're safe. No, there's lots of things that are natural. Henbane is natural, it's not safe. Datura is natural, it is not safe. So just because something is a plant or natural doesn't necessarily mean it's safe. The second point I would make is Americans have this idea that if a little bit is good, more has to be better. It's the bigger, better. Oh, it's you see it in advertising. It's always new, improved, bigger, better. Well, with herbs, that's not necessarily true. So, for instance, something like ginger, which is really useful for nausea, but if you take too much ginger, it causes nausea.
Mm.
So, a little bit is good. More is not better. Don't exceed the recommended dosage. And so, when we talk about food herbs, we have to make two disclaimers. One is allergies. Anybody can be allergic to anything, any food, any herb, any pharmaceutical, any cosmetic, any household cleaner. So differentiating allergies. So somebody will say, if you say, oh, chamomile is a food herb, they say, oh yeah, well, somebody died from chamomile. Yes, that is true. There is one reported case of somebody having a severe ragweed allergy, and the pollen in chamomile is similar enough, same family, in the Asteraceae family, to ragweed, that they had an anaphylactic reaction and died. Millions of cups of chamomile tea are drunk a day throughout the world, and it is incredibly safe. So discounting allergies and discounting what are called idiosyncratic reactions. It's not an allergic reaction. It's just a weird reaction that you have, again, which you can have to any food, any herb, any supplement, any pharmaceutical. I'll give you an example. There is an herb called burdock root. Burdock is used as a food. It's called gobo in Japan. It is incredibly safe. And yet, anytime I have burdock root tincture or tea, I vomit.
Mm.
I've tried it multiple times just to see. And it's just a weird idiosyncratic reaction. I'm not allergic to it. It's just something about it triggers that response. So if we take out idiosyncratic reactions, which are real but rare, and we take out allergies to most herbs, which are also real but mostly rare, there are a few things like propolis, which is uh, basically created by bees. It's bee saliva mixed with resins from poplar trees and things like that. Anybody who has a bee allergy should stay away from propolis. Propolis
Mm.
probably causes more allergies than any other quote unquote herbal substance I'm aware of. So I won't even give somebody propolis unless I first ask them, do they have any sensitivity I mean, most of us, if we get stung by a bee, are going to have a reaction, but we don't have an anaphylactic reaction.
Mm.
Um, barring those things, these food herbs are remarkably safe. Then we have our medicines. Medicines are stronger acting. They need to be used with more knowledge. They're usually used for a specific purpose for a period of time, and then you stop taking them. You don't take them every day just because they're good for you. And so examples there would be things like black cohosh, excuse me, that we mentioned earlier. It's not a food herb. It's much stronger. Ephedra, which is now banned, is a medicine. It should only have been used for specific purposes. In Chinese medicine, it's used for asthma, and it is used for fevers without sweating. It's never been used as a weight loss aid that you take every day to lose weight, and it was never used as an herbal stimulant. Plus, you'd add other herbs in with it to actually prevent some of the adverse effects, none of which was done by American companies selling that as a
Mm.
product. And then lastly, we have the poisons. And poisons should be left alone unless you are trained to use them and understand their toxicology. They should only be used under professional guidance. And so if we understand that and we use herbs appropriately, they can be remarkably safe. But it requires the person using the herbs to get some background information. Unfortunately, many times if you go into a supermarket or a natural food store, the people in there may not be knowledgeable enough to say, what this is. Most of the stuff available in your store is going to be relatively safe, but there are plenty of medicine type herbs that are available in stores that should be used with a bit more knowledge. And so finding good sources, you mentioned earlier my work on the Botanical Safety Handbook. The Botanical Safety Handbook is the standard reference for not only botanical safety but herb drug interactions, and it is a, a work. We're updating. The second edition is came out, I don't know, 10 years ago or 8 years ago in hardcover, but we've never stopped working on it. I mean, we're constantly updating it, and there's an online edition which constantly gets updated. We talked earlier about writing a book and then needing updates, constantly being updated. And it is a group of quote unquote experts, and we have medical doctors and toxicologists and pharmacists and clinical herbalists all working together to create this book, which again far exceeds anything else that has ever been published on the topic, again, of herb safety, and including information on when available, because there's a remarkably little data on safety during pregnancy, safety during with lactation, again, interactions, are there problems, and the nice thing is it's not written by people who have just looking at animal research or in vitro research. It's also people who actually use these things clinically and actually understand how they're used. Because unfortunately, a lot of information that is out there today is sometimes written by people who are researchers. And I'm not saying researchers shouldn't write, but there's a big difference between being a researcher and doing animal studies or in vitro studies, test tube lab studies, and actually using something clinically with patients. They're very, very different things. So, we hear about herb drug interactions all the time, and you have to understand that 50% of the reported herb drug interactions are either in vitro, and in vitro interactions almost never turn out to be true in vivo in a living organism. And a significant number are animal studies, mostly mice or rats. And so, for example, and this is not an herb, but the pharmaceutical thalidomide, which caused horrible birth defects back in the 60s, was tested on mice and rats, and it was perfectly safe in mice and rats, but it wasn't safe in humans. We're similar, but we're not the same. And even some studies have caused problem in rats or mice, but not the other one. And they're really close. So we really have to understand that first off, and more important, of course, we're looking for human data, but we're also looking for people who understand, like, this herb is used for very short periods of time in a very low dose for acute situation, and that's it. That's really different than somebody taking something on a daily basis. Or there's studies about a specific constituent from an herb. Well, an herb is not a specific constituent. It is a myriad of constituents, and that one constituent, which might be toxic, lima beans contain cyanide. That doesn't mean we're sitting there going, oh my God, I'm not going to eat lima beans because I'm going to die from cyanide poisoning. The amount is small and it is non-toxic. And that is true for a lot of herbs that may contain a specific compound that is problematic. For instance, things like fennel seed and sage contain a compound called estragol. Estragol by itself is really problematic, but in the form of fennel seeds, not really. So, putting that information together, that sort of group effort is really, I think, just important to advance herbal medicine. And so, I really want to see a time where, we have people who have all these different areas of knowledge so that we can create a sustainable practice of medicine here in the United States.
Mhm.
We spend more per capita for medical care than any country in the world. Yet we are far down the list. In fact, below every other so-called developed country when it comes to life expectancy, infant mortality, mortality of the mother. I mean, the only areas we're near the top is obesity and cancer.
Not where you want to be.
We're not number one, but we're close.
Yeah.
And so obviously, and in our medical system, you can't keep spending that amount of money on people and getting such bad results. And so I believe that really well done herbal medicine, it's not the answer, but it is a piece of the answer to creating a sustainable practice of medicine along with diet and all these other things so that we can be healthier and have to spend less money because I think we've all heard the old saying and an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so if we can keep people healthy, we'll spend a whole lot less money and have longer, healthier, and better quality lives.
Well, I hope that your vision for having an herbalist in every community and clinically on staff, I hope that that is in the very near future so that we can all work together. Yeah, it's so important. And for individuals at home, thank you for your very in-depth answer because you actually answered my next question too, which is how individuals can apply this at home. And um, first, doing your research, investing in the book. Can you give the name of the book once again?
It's a botanical safety handbook. It's not inexpensive. And I would actually at this point recommend the online edition because that's updated and the hardcover edition is now um, getting old.
Okay, yeah. So it sounds like that would be a great first step.
Mhm.
And what you said about what you mentioned about herbs not being just the constituent, but having so many different constituents that work together and differently than if you're just looking at that one
Mhm.
constituent. I think it also applies to a lot of what we teach in plant-based food medicine, plant-based diets, is that sometimes, oftentimes actually, we think of, I'm going to get my protein, so I'm getting this. And it's like you're not just getting the protein, you're getting everything that comes with that protein. So like when we compare animals to animal protein versus plant protein, we're saying look at the whole food,
Mhm.
not just the protein. You're not just getting protein, you're getting so much in that plant-based source of protein, the phytochemicals and the fiber and so much more that is going to lend to better health. So yeah, looking at herbs that in that same way is so important. All right, well, I'll start with Linda, who has a question about osteoporosis, and she would like to know what herbs or herb combinations can help with osteoporosis. She mentions the body having to absorb calcium to strengthen bones. We know that there's calcium is so important for bones, but there's so many other factors that are important for bones. So she's curious at what or which herbs can support bone health.
All right. So I wish I could give you a simple one sentence answer, but that is not what's going to happen here. So, first off, in order to absorb calcium, you need adequate gastric HCl, gastric hydrochloric acid. And probably, I don't know what Linda's age, but assuming she's talking about osteoporosis, let's assume that she is in the age group that is more of an issue. And most people, by the time they're 35 or 40, are under-secreting gastric HCl. So achlorhydria, also known as hypochlorhydria, is really common. The average American thinks because of advertising on TV that all these people running around with too much stomach acid. Hyperchlorhydria, too much stomach acid, is really rare. You see it sometimes in young people, especially really excitable young people who, but in older folks, by the time you are 50, you're probably secreting, at least 30% less gastric HCl than you did when you were in your 20s or 30s. And by the time you're in your 60s or 70s, you're probably are at least 50% less than you did. And too little gastric HCl, gastric stomach acid, is associated with increased levels of GERD. GERD is not too much stomach acid. GERD is too little stomach acid, except what you have left is in the wrong place, going up into your esophagus, which is not designed to handle any stomach acid. So increased levels of GERD, IBS, and SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, are all associated with hypochlorhydria, a lack of stomach acid. If you don't have adequate stomach acid, you can't absorb calcium or magnesium or any number of other compounds that are essential for bone health. So, number one, we need to stimulate gastric HCl. And my favorite way of doing that is using bitters. So I always like to say everything's better with bitters. Now, that's not entirely true for every single person, but for most people, bitters enhance digestion, absorption, and elimination. My favorite bitters formulas combine both warming bitters and cooling bitters, because if you only have cooling bitters like gentian or artichoke leaf, it eventually damps down stomach fire, inhibiting digestion. So you combine those cooling bitters with warming bitters like Angelica archangelica, which is one of my favorite bitters, and orange peel. Orange peel is the single best herb for stimulating gastric hydrochloric acid that I have ever seen. And so something like that, number one, stimulates gastric HCl. Now, if you also have issues like GERD, there are things you have to do that, because if you don't deal with some of the other issues, that may make your problem worse. But for the most part, you stimulate gastric HCl. That's number one. Number two, it's not just calcium. You need calcium and all its cofactors. So that's calcium, magnesium, potassium, boron, vitamin K2, all of those are, and silicic acid, which is organic silica, all of those are essential for calcium metabolism. Oh, and vitamin D. All of those are essential for normal calcium metabolism. So you need to make sure you are getting all of those either from your diet, or in the case of vitamin D, from the sun, which has its own set of risks, or as supplements. And as you know, Nichole, there's actually a lot of good studies showing that getting your nutrition from food, in most cases, is actually vastly superior to getting your nutrition from a supplement in a pill, in a bottle. Not that I don't use those things at times, but you just need to be aware, like all those studies that were done years ago with like beta carotene, and they stopped the studies because cancer rates, like lung cancer rates, went up. Beta carotene doesn't exist in nature by itself. It exists with alpha carotene, gamma carotene, cryptoxanthin, zeaxanthin, astaxanthin, and all these other carotenoids. And that's how you're going to find them in pumpkin. That's how you're going to find them in a butternut squash. That's how you're going to find them in a yellow or red pepper. And so to find things in a sort of food-based matrix, either as a food or a concentrated food supplement, like a spirulina, for instance, in many ways is way better than just taking something, like a beta carotene or something like that. So that's number one. Then there are herbs that enhance bone density. There are a lot of them, but I'll mention of just a few that are probably more common ones. Number one is nettle leaf. Okay. Everybody thinks nettles are really rich in iron. They actually have significantly more calcium than they have iron. They also have magnesium. So nettle leaf. Number two, horsetail, which enhances maturation of osteoblasts in the bone and is also a really rich source of silicic acid, which is a cofactor for calcium absorption. It's organic silica. To that, we might add in something like a dandelion leaf or alfalfa. Both are nutrient dense, and they don't have one vitamin or mineral. They have dozens, or maybe more, of vitamins and minerals. And so something like that, and I don't want to promote a specific product, but something like that in a powdered form, minerals aren't extracted all that well in tinctures. So here we're talking about these things powdered and taken as a capsule, or these things made into maybe green drinks or things like that, green smoothies, things like that would probably be your best way to do that. And again, I'm not going to mention a specific product, but I have a product that I use that contains all those things. And I've been using this product for 40 years clinically. And from the old days in case files, I have before and after x-rays. And the before x-ray, you have bone that looks like lace. It's demineralized bone. 2 years later, it's remineralized bone. Now
Wow.
I have before and after DEXA scans, and same thing. I've used this to prevent osteoporosis, to treat osteoporosis. I mean, if the bone's gone, it's gone. There's nothing you can do about that. But if the bone is still there, and you add, make sure to include all these other cofactors, and again, things like the nettle we talked about, the nettle leaf contains lots of vitamin K1. And if you have a healthy gut and gut flora, the gut flora will convert that K1 into K2. And so, and I forgot also, there's another one I forgot earlier, boron. Don't forget boron. And nettle contains boron, and alfalfa contains boron. And so all those things can certainly help. And then also, weight bearing exercise is also very useful here to in that level. So being a couch potato is not good for your bones.
Right. Yeah, strength training is so important. You definitely need that on top of everything that you mentioned. I had questions, two questions. The product, I know we're going to get the question, what is the product? Because so just to save us having to email you later and say, what is that product that you recommend? But you're not recommending a product. Can you share the name, or is it your product, or is it a product? And
Yeah,
and it's okay. I think you would help a lot of people. And
called OsteoHerb.
OsteoHerb. Okay, I know we're going to get the question, and just to encourage everybody again, not medical advice, and work with your
Right.
healthcare professional, and know that everything that we said here is based on individual approaches, and everybody is different. But I know that we're probably going to get the question after. I'm curious myself. I think that's great, and I'm also curious about the research that you've done on your herb, and the age of the subjects. Does it vary, or do you have a specific age group that you're looking at with the DEXA scans and the bone health?
Most of these, the majority are women, some men, and most of them are ages 45 through 65.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's so wonderful to hear that and for how long, and that you're researching, and you've researched this product
Well,
for
it's not
a
so
long
much
time.
research is that, when you work with patients, you have case histories and,
Yeah.
and with follow-ups, you actually get to see what's happening. I've never published any case reports or anything like that, but I should get them together and do a case, a case series. I probably could get it published. Just
Yeah.
time and energy.
Yep. You don't need to sleep. Just, yeah, no, this is great information and very helpful. So thank you. And I also wanted to mention that um, a question just related to the nettle. I personally purchased nettle tea for allergies. So is that also appropriate for allergies? And do we see herbs? I'm sure we see them having an effect for different things. So bones, yes, because they have a lot of different nutrients and phytochemicals in them that are working in different areas. But I guess we can see these herbs that you're mentioning. Yes, they could support bone health, but we may also, or like dandelion, um, could help maybe in other areas. Do you see that with?
Virtually no herb. I mean, if you look at something like senna, it has one primary use, it's a laxative.
Mhm.
But most herbs, we give them names: anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, diuretic, diaphoretic, analgesic, etc. Herbs don't care about our names. They have multitude of constituents, and they affect multiple tissues throughout the body. And so it is exceedingly rare that an herb only does one thing. So something like dandelion leaf is a aquaretic, which is a non-irritating potassium sparing diuretic. It is also a digestive bitter, and it is also nutrient dense. So it does multiple things. Um, Horsetail, not only, it also can be used for um, uh, strengthening hair and
Mm.
skin and teeth, enhances the healing of bone fractures. Horsetail also has some diuretic activity, and it's used for hematuria, blood in the urine. Now, obviously, if you have blood in the urine, you want to go to a doctor and find out why you have blood in the urine, because that's not normal. And so, but on the other hand, if you're a marathoner, and a lot of marathoners, after running for 26 miles on concrete, they lacerate their kidneys
Mm.
and they'll urinate blood for 2 to 3 days after a race. Do horsetail, you won't. So, I mean, all of these herbs have multiple activities. And that's one of the beauties when you learn about an herb. Think about an herb as having a personality like a person. The idea is that plants, in my mind, are like this. They have personalities and they have a wide array, not just chemistry, but uses, activities, how they exist in the world. They have interesting relationships with other plants. They have mycorrhizal associations with fungi. Um, Plants communicate with each other through pheromones. So if you have a forest that's 300 miles wide and one side of the forest gets attacked by insects, those trees will release chemicals that drift into the wind, and the other trees will pick this up and start changing the chemistry of their leaves to make themselves less attractive to that pest.
Mm. Brilliant.
So they are unique and wonderful entities. And so, we tend to think of them as sort of alive, but they're these things and they're here for our use. Mm-mm. They're older than we are. They've been here longer than we are. And so I always think of them as elders, who can teach us a lot if we're open to listening and paying
Mm.
attention and getting out of our own way. I think people, I think we have a lot of hubris about just how smart we are and how much we know. I always tell people, when people say to me, "Oh, you know so much," and I always think of it this way: when it comes just to herbal medicine, I mean, you get into other topics like plumbing, boy, I really know nothing. But with herbal medicine, I know this much. And I'm not joking when I tell people after 55 years, I now feel comfortable calling myself an advanced beginner because it's vast. Now, some people, you mentioned this earlier, some people that seems daunting. It's like, no, I want something that
Mm.
I can learn in a weekend. Well, the good thing about this is you can learn in a weekend. You learn a little bit and then you build on that and you build on that and you build on that and you can grow in your knowledge. As you were saying, it's a journey. Because again, if this was a finite body of knowledge, I would have gotten bored and moved on to something else a long, long time ago. To me, it is exciting that every single day presents an opportunity to learn something new.
Mm.
Every single patient provides the opportunity to learn something new. Every time I meet a new plant, it provides an opportunity to learn something new. Every time I open up a book, it provides an opportunity to learn something new. And isn't that why we're here? To learn and to grow and to become the best people we can become? I would hope that's why we're here.
I love that so much. Yeah, just be curious and adventurous and soak it all in and learn and grow. And I got chills when you said trees are, the plant life. They're like our elders, and it's very humbling to think of it in that way. And I think it puts it all into perspective. I feel like I should end there. I do know that we have one more question about stress, and it's so common.
Mhm.
And I think this is going to help a lot of people. With any information or experience you can provide on. Are there any specific herbs or herbal combinations that can help with stress? And I know that there's the lifestyle changes and addressing it from other areas as well. But what would you recommend for herbs?
Well, to answer your question, the answer is yes. So, all right. Again, that would be the simple answer, but not the answer that the person wants. So what I'll say is there are all sorts of categories of herbs, and we're not even talking about the lifestyle stuff. We're not talking about stress reduction techniques, daily deep breathing exercises, highly recommended. Qigong, Tai Chi, yogic breathing, meditation, all highly recommended. But from an herbal perspective, there are certain categories that are useful. The number one category are what are called nervines. If we're in the UK, they call them nervines. Nervines are not sedatives, they're nerve tonics. They are calming and sort of enhance the emotional foundation. So things like fresh milky oat, lemon balm, linden flower, chamomile, to some degree, St. John's wort. These are skullcap. These are nervines, and they are different ones are used for different things, meaning it's not just like, oh, any one of them. I mean, you probably could take almost any one of them, but some of them do better things. For instance, like if you're the kind of person that when you get stressed out, you develop GI stuff, every time you get stressed out, you get a stomach ache or your IBS gets worse, then you're looking at chamomile or catnip or hops or valerian, which are all pretty specific for GI issues that are stress induced. If you have somebody who, for instance, when they get stressed out, they develop their blood pressure tends to go up or they get headaches, then something maybe like linden flower might be really nice. Anyway, the point being is, we have different nervines that work for different things, but nervines in general, and there's lots of products in the marketplace that are already made up. I can't think of any names that are sort of, calm tea or something like that, which contain some of these things. Um, then, in addition to nervines, we also have, let's say you're stressed out and you're really anxious. We have a whole group of herbs, many of which are all still nervines, but also have anxiolytic activity. So there we have herbs like bacopa and motherwort, which I mentioned earlier, and blue vervain. We have herbs like Chinese polygala, which is much stronger. And these herbs can be used for anxiety, both generalized anxiety disorder, acute anxiety because you have to give a speech tomorrow, etc. We also have a category of herbs which are known as adaptogens. And as you mentioned in the introduction, I've written a book on adaptogens. And adaptogens are it's complicated, but on the most simplistic level, they're herbs that help us to resist and adapt to stress more effectively. But that is not the full definition of what an adaptogen is. So nervines do that, but they're not adaptogens. So there are adaptogens that are stimulating, like red ginseng and rhodiola. Somebody's really stressed out, I probably wouldn't be using those in most cases. But we also have some adaptogens that are calming, like Schizandra and ashwagandha and another Chinese herb called jiaogulan. These herbs are more calming. So a combination of nervines and calming adaptogens and possibly some anxiolytics if there's a lot of anxiety would make a lovely combination. And what's really nice is you can make things not all herbs taste good. Like bacopa is really bitter. Most people wouldn't want to drink it as a tea, but you can make some lovely tasting tea. So linden flower tastes great. And assuming you do not have really severe ragweed allergies, a combination, equal parts of linden flower and chamomile and lemon balm with a little bit maybe of organic rose petals, especially fragrant rose petals. You don't want commercial rose petals because they're heavily sprayed since it's not considered a food crop. So you would want organic rose petals and you want to smell them. If they smell beautifully like roses, then you want to use them. If they smell like nothing, then don't bother. So you've got the linden flower, the chamomile, the lemon balm, a little bit of rose petals, and then maybe throw in, oh, I don't know, we could put something like the Chinese dried longan fruit, which you can buy as dried fruit in any Chinese market. Longan fruit is calming. And so you take some of those, you stick them in the freezer, the dried fruit, and then you put all the herbs in a blender with a little bit of that frozen longan and really quickly grind it up, and it makes a great tea. And if it's frozen, it'll grind very nicely. If it's not, it just gums up your blender. And then you have that. You take a teaspoon or two of that mixture, cover it with 8 ounces of hot water, put it in a teapot or put a plate on top of your teacup, let it sit for 15, 20 minutes, strain it, and drink it. And it's a lovely, gentle, relaxing combination that will help reduce stress. Now, obviously, if your life is like incredibly stressful, it isn't going to change what's coming from outside, but it may help you acclimate and become less reactive to those stressors.
Right. Yeah. That plus breath work, meditation,
All of the
nature will
above.
help you become more resilient to those same things that are still going to be there. Um, One quick follow-up question to that. You mentioned linden flower and blood pressure. Are there any precautions people need to take when taking Western medication? Do they need to talk to their healthcare provider before taking any of these herbs?
I mean, talking to your healthcare provider is always a really good idea. The problem is many of your healthcare providers just know
I
nothing
don't know.
about herbs, or they have heard herbs are dangerous. So, I can't tell you how many people say, "Oh, don't take herbs." It's like, does that mean I should stop eating cinnamon and ginger and blueberries and onions and garlic, which are all herbs? Um, and so, for the most part, as I mentioned earlier, clinically relevant herb drug interactions are pretty rare. But there are some things. Give you just a couple quick examples because I know time is limited. But licorice. Licorice is an interesting herb, and excess licorice can cause what's called a pseudo hyperaldosterogenic effect, which means it causes you to retain sodium and excrete potassium, thus increasing your blood pressure and
Mm.
increasing risk of arrhythmias. So licorice, I never give licorice to anybody who doesn't have optimal blood pressure. So the high end of normal blood pressure is 120 over 80. I want people whose blood pressure is better than that before I give them
Mm.
licorice. Licorice is always used as a very small part of a large formula. So let's say we have 6 or 7 herbs in a tea. Licorice is not only going to be not one part, maybe a quarter to a half a part. If everything else is one part, licorice is a quarter to a half of a part because you only need a tiny bit of licorice to get the effect. So that's number one. So you use it in a small part of a larger formula. You don't give it to people, and the people who are most susceptible to the pseudo hyperaldosterogenic effect are women who are over 40 and overweight. Now, it doesn't mean they're the only ones that can happen to, but they are more susceptible to that happening. Um, and So that's one example of something you need to be worried, concerned about. I wouldn't say worried, but you need to be aware of. I would also suggest licorice be avoided during pregnancy. I'm not talking about Twizzlers. Well, I'd recommend Twizzlers be avoided during pregnancy too, but for an
Right.
entirely different reason.
Different reason.
But real licorice or candies made from real licorice, there are some enough studies showing that licorice during pregnancy is probably not a good idea, that I would just say stay away. So that would be one example. Another quick example is ashwagandha. Ashwagandha is an adaptogen. It's a calming adaptogen. For the most part, it is very safe. There have been a small number of what I would consider idiosyncratic cases of hepatotoxicity, but considering how many millions, probably hundreds of millions of people who are using ashwagandha around the world, especially in India, but around the world on a daily basis, the risk is exceedingly low, and it's probably related to some kind of peculiar gene snip that a few people have. But ashwagandha stimulates the thyroid, and so therefore, if somebody has Hashimoto's thyroiditis, then ashwagandha is probably appropriate. But if they have Graves' disease, which is another autoimmune disease that causes hyperthyroid function, ashwagandha is contraindicated. So yeah, it behooves you to learn a little bit about these things that you're going to be taking, especially if you're taking them for medicinal reasons. For the most part, again, your food herbs are generally safe. Your medicinal herbs you need a bit more knowledge to use them, appropriately. And I think with anything, I think most people want to know what they're putting into their bodies. So if you're going to take
Mhm.
supplements, you need to read about them. If you can take herbs, you should read about them. I will tell you one really wonderful source of information about herbs that's science based but really accessible is a publication called Herbalgram from the American Botanical Council. And it's a wonderful source. They have a great website with lots of information. And so I recommend them very highly. And for people who are just getting into herbal medicine, I've mentioned my friend Rosemary Gladstar. She has a wonderful introductory herb program that can be done online, that is for beginners. It's for people who, are just wanting to know basic stuff, and it's a great program.
Mhm.
So there are things like that out there. Find your local herbalist, go for herb walks, and just start learning and bringing this into your life. And if you have a garden or you have a patio, you can start growing these things. Do you know that every single thing in your spice cabinet, with the exception of salt and cream of tartar, is a medicinal herb? And they're not just for seasoning your food, whether we are talking about um, rosemary or sage or thyme or ginger. Every single one of them is a medicinal herb
Mm.
that you can use. So you've got medicinal herbs in your house already.
Already in your cabinet.
Uh-huh.
And I love the idea of planting too. We just started, well, actually, it's been 2 years now. My husband and I started a native garden in our front and back. We pulled up all the grass, created a native garden, and they're all, last spring, they were all kind of starting to come to life. And it was like an exciting moment. They're still babies, but they're still, and
Mm-hmm.
one of them, we were looking just for native plants to Atlanta, or, the Southeast region. And I didn't even realize we have so many herbs in our garden that we could use. Like St. John's wort was one of them, and I was like, "Oh, I wonder if I can actually use these leaves." So this conversation has, I mean, it's been inspiring on many levels. But just to kind of investigate what you can plant, what's in your spice cabinet, and what you can already use. It's already so accessible to you. You've shared so much passion and knowledge and experience here with us today, and I know you've inspired me. I just want to go explore right now myself. So thank you for, and I'm sure everybody else is feeling the same. And hopefully everyone's taking notes, and I'm sure we're going to get lots of replays because you've shared so much information. So thank you for providing so many resources here with us today, David. Are there any resources? Where can people find you and all of your work?
Well, they can go to my website for my school, the David Winston Center for Herbal Studies. The website is herbstudies.net. And not only do we have information about the 2-year program, we have things from my library that you can download for free, all sorts of old books and cool things that are hard to find. If anybody's interested in my company, Herbalist and Alchemist, that's herbalist-alchemist.com. My books are available in multiple places. You can get them on Amazon, your local bookstore. I highly recommend supporting your local independent bookstore. There's the book Adapted Desserts for Strength, Stamina, and Stress Relief. I have several other books available. One of them, which is called Herbal Therapeutics, is available from Herbalist and Alchemist. And yeah, I think those are the major sources of information about me. And if any of you happen to be going to an herbal conference and I happen to be teaching there, please come on up and say hello and introduce yourself, because I always love to meet new people, and especially people who are equally passionate about herbal medicine. So again, thank you all.
Thank you, David. I can second your adaptogen book. It's been my go-to for many years and everything you offer. So again, thank you for your dedication. We appreciate you.
When it comes to cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, heart disease, and other chronic illness, what really matters isn't how many books you read, how many webinars you attend, or how much you know. What really matters at the end of the day is what you eat and how you live. The science has given us what we need to know. Now it's time for action. It's time to implement and optimize your healthy lifestyle. It's time to get results. It's time to say goodbye to confusion and hello to clarity. It's time to say goodbye to bad habits and hello to good ones. It's time to fall in love with foods that love you back. It's time to join a community that will support you in achieving your goals. It's time for Whole Life Club.